Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? We're getting close to Halloween. Probably going to talk about that at some point. But today, I have finished it. I have just completed reading The Stand. 10 days, 1,200 pages, 120 pages a day. That's not like how I read it. There were probably a few days in there where I didn't read very much because it's daunting. But there were other days where I'd read hundreds of pages in a day. 10 days. I know because I checked it out from the library and it's due back on the 30th. So 10 days to read The Stand. That was a thing. And so we're going to talk about it. For this first part, of course, no spoilers. I'll try to give you my general thoughts. And then I'll give you a good warning before I jump into spoilers if you want to read this book. And I think you should. I think that if you enjoy reading, you should read this book. I think that if you don't enjoy reading, you should read this book. My first takeaway is that the book is gigantic. And the reason for that is not readily apparent. I think even after reading the entire story, I'm not sure why it's so big. But I'm not upset that it's so big. I talked previous videos about King and about how he likes to meander and wander, and part of that is the fact that he doesn't know his own stories before he types them. He sits down and just starts typing, and that's how he learns the story himself. I read recently about the Dark Tower series that those books were never edited. He just typed a first draft and published it. And so this book, though, has been edited. The version that I read was the revised, uncut edition that was released in the 90s. And it added almost 400 pages. I think this clocks in at just under 1,200 pages. And a lot of that is just character. I mean, in reality, that's what this book is. It's a character study. It's not necessarily about the end of the world or anything like that. Hopefully this isn't a spoiler to you, but the idea behind the book is what happens to society after a super flu. Like, that's the whole thing, right? And it kind of asks the question of, are there sides if that were to happen? If 99 point something percent of humanity was gone, would we develop, how quickly would we devolve into little countries, right, who have it out for each other? That's kind of the premise. King's writing style is, like I said earlier, very meandering, but I talked yesterday, if you didn't watch yesterday's video, you should go watch it. I talked yesterday about the reason that I feel it meanders a lot is because when King writes characters, he writes, even the narrator speaks to you, the reader, through that character. So that character is their own narrator. And it can be very jarring and very confusing at first. And in a book like this, where there's probably dozens of characters who take the stage, I guess you could say, and you have to read through their eyes, it can become a little bit cluttered and confusing and weird, and you're like, why are we suddenly writing like this? Why is there suddenly these interjections of random thoughts? And that's just that character, and you get to understand that by the end of 1,200 pages, I would hope. I will not lie and say that there was points where I considered giving up on it because I felt like the story wasn't going anywhere. But raw determination got me through those points because this book was first published in the 70s, right? It's been out longer than I've been alive. I'm 40, I'll be 42 soon. This book was published like a couple of years before I was born, so almost 45 years. And it's still heralded as one of the greatest books ever written. Not just one of the greatest Stephen King books ever written, but one of the greatest books ever written. And so I had to read it. I had to get through it, if for no other reason than to make this video, because I told you I would, right? But the reality is, it has a lot of gravity. Those 1,200 pages carry a whole lot. And there are a lot of times where you feel like nothing is happening. But I think that what is happening is not necessarily on the page. It's what's happening here. It's what's happening in you, right? And that's pretty much the point. There is definitely some choice words in here that were very jarring, and I'm positive there's a lot of people who would say that should have been edited out because it is very there's racist words in here, there's homophobic words in here, there's a lot of hate in here, but this is one of those weird things where you separate who wrote the book from who's telling the story. And those moments of hate, those moments of those words being used are that character. That's that character's thought. And it really helps you as the reader hate that person even more, right? And so if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, beware. There is a whole lot of difficult subject matter in this book. Not only the racist stuff, not only the homophobic stuff, not only the treating of the differently abled. There's a lot of scenes in this book that are challenging and disturbing and weird and definitely not for the faint-hearted, because even in me, and I consider myself to be very empathetic towards emotion. If you start crying, I'll start crying with you for no reason. But when it comes to reading, I don't get the willies when I read a uncomfortable scene. I don't get that sinking feeling when the book turns dark. But there's a whole lot of opportunity for that if you respond to the written word that way. Take it in small chunks, I think, is what I would say. Overall, I think the book is a wonderful experience, and I feel like that's what it is. It's more of an experience than a novel, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So read the book, then come back and watch the rest of this video, because from here on out, I'm going to spoil all kinds of stuff, and I don't want to ruin the book for you. So if you want to read it, or if you're going to watch the CBS show that's coming out in December, maybe just stop here, because the rest of this is spoilers, and that's it. That's your warning. So, my thoughts are, as a want-to-be author, as I'm reading this book, I cannot pick out who the character is in this book. Like, who has the arc? Who goes on the journey? Well, they all do. Every single character in this book has an arc. They all go through a thing and become somebody different. But there's not one of those I can point to and say, that's who the book's about. I guess you could say it's about Stu and Franny. Maybe. But I don't think it is. I think what the book, the main protagonist of this book is humanity, is society, is maybe even the earth. Like, that is the character that goes through the arc. Society is the character in this book. And I didn't catch that until way later. And so all the stuff I said in the first half of this video where I talked about the meandering and the wandering and it being worth it, and then in the moment when I almost gave up on the books, it was because I was watching a character that didn't really make a whole lot of sense to me go and do some weird stuff. Like Trash Can Man, his chapters were these like hour-long reads because he would go do something and then he would be assaulted with his own thoughts, and you, the reader, get assaulted with those same thoughts over and over again. King does not spare you by writing little summaries of he started having those thoughts. He just writes them constantly. Don't burn the check. You know, what are you doing, Trash Man? You know, all that stuff. And so you get bombarded with the same stuff that Trash is going through. And so I got to the point where I was like, what is this? Right? And there's a whole lot of that in this book. There's a whole lot of moments that are just little dioramas of a character, and we get to experience life through that character's eyes as they go through this plague. And in the grand scheme of things, and what I said about picking out who is the main character of this book, well, I guess maybe it's Randall Flagg. Maybe he's the main character. Maybe he has to suffer and everything fall apart. But I don't think so. I still think society is the main character of this book, is the main protagonist. And all of those moments that we get, those little segments, don't really add up to anything, and all of the characters, all of the people besides Trash Man, Randall Flagg, and Mother Abigail, besides those three people, the rest of them really don't affect the story at all. I mean, they do. And you can argue for or against a whole lot of things. You can say that Franny is one of the most attachable characters and lovable, the person that you're cheering for, but she doesn't do anything in the whole book, right? She doesn't really accomplish. I mean, she turns Harold against her, which gets Nick killed. Okay, and what did that do for the grand scheme of things? Nothing. The grand scheme of things is these two societies come together, one because of Randall, one because of Abigail, and the Trash Man blows them up. It blows up, Randall Flagg's area. Those are the three characters that do something in the grand scheme of things. But I think the reality is, if you look at through the lens of society, if you look at it saying that humanity is the main character of this novel, we get to see two very different sides of humanity. We get to see this loving and caring, and we want to do the right thing. We're just not quite sure how that's going to form yet. That's the Free Zone group. And then we get to see Randall Flagg's law and order to the nth degree, and data and information will win the day, and we're going to rely on the constructs of a civilized, industrialized world to achieve that goal at whatever the cost. And we get to see those two ideals face off, but they really never do. There is no fight in this book. There is no struggle. It's all inside. It's all an internal fight within every person to be drawn towards either Mother Abigail or Randall Flagg. It's this personalized pull in one direction or the other. It's that warmth that Harold felt when he crossed, into the dude's area before he died. It's that the wash of intelligence that comes to Joe and I just forgot his name, Tom, when they're in the presence of Mother Abigail. It's those moments that are entirely personal to each character that is the main conflict, the stand in this book. And then ultimately, I guess the real stand is the four councilmen deciding to take Mother Abigail at face value and go off into the desert on foot and trust in a higher power to hold them through. And that is the real test of humanity right there. And, it could have gone differently. Maybe the three of them could have made it there. And, I say three because obviously one got his leg broke. And maybe they could have come as kind of peaceful protesters and turned the people against Randall Flagg, but it didn't work out that way because Trash Can Man comes rolling into town and blows everybody up. I don't know that either way it would have mattered. In the full on scheme of it all, I don't know if the destruction of that town really, or the rebelling of that town would have ultimately mattered, because when we get to the end of the book and the Free Zone is starting to kind of rebuild, starting to depend on technology and arming the police and all that sort of stuff, we're starting to see that that's what society is going to become anyway. And so Stu and Franny leave with little Peter. I cried. I did a lot of crying. Funnily enough, I did not cry at any of the deaths. I was not necessarily heavily impacted by any of them. I would say maybe Nick's, but at that point when Nick died, he was already kind of a side character. We had lived through Nick for a while and it was really touching. And then when we got to Boulder, Nick became kind of this little side character. And so when he got killed, it was kind of like I had already gained distance from him and I was already attaching myself to other characters. What I cried about, the thing that got me the most, and this is that empathy coming through, was Tom saving Stu and their journey back to Boulder. and all of the stuff that Tom learned on that journey, and then Nick coming to him. I cried about all of that. I cried about Tom saving the day. I cried about this simple man saving humanity, right? Stu being the he's the one now. You know, he is the humanity now, and that touched me way more than anything else in the book. It touched me way more than the weird rapes. It touched me way more than any of the deaths. It touched me way more than you know, electricity or whatever. That hurt me, or that didn't hurt me. It made me feel the most. I felt the most for those two in that journey back. I will say that, you know, even that journey back, I feel like it could have been a much shorter journey for us, the reader. I feel like it could have been, like, we could have skipped some of the, you know, but I think that was on purpose, right? I think that King was not letting you get the satisfaction of them returning to Boulder as quickly as you had hoped. Because it wasn't really over. Like, the bomb went off and all of those people are destroyed, but it wasn't really over. We needed to see Stu. We needed to see more determination, and we needed to understand that the path that Stu and Tom were on was not just a joyous walk back to humanity. It was still a struggle, and they continued through it, trusting in a power that they didn't understand. Strong book. You know, I'm not a religious person in the sense of good and evil. I believe myself to be spiritual. I believe myself to want to have more beyond the mortal realm, but I don't necessarily prescribe to good versus evil. I don't prescribe to any of the major religions. But I think that wasn't the point. King used God, and King used a quote demon in Randall Flagg to point out the two different societies, this technologically machination society versus this loving and caring society, being the two sides of King's good and evil. It did not feel heavy-handed. There was some literal preaching in this book, but it did not feel preachy. It felt like that was the natural way that these people were coming to their realization that maybe there was something helping them. Maybe there was something pushing them along. Maybe there was somebody looking out for them. And that somebody is not necessarily going to make everything rainbows and sunshine. It's going to be a struggle, but you just have to put your faith in it and go on your own. So, overall, I think this is one of the better books I've read in a while, even though I can't point at it and say, this is the story arc, this is the character, this is the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. There are definitely acts in this thing, but I can't tell you why. Only that humanity went through these 3 periods. Humanity as a whole went through, you know, this change, this growth, this challenge, and this new status quo. And I think that is pretty remarkable. So, I mean, I read it in 10 days, right? 1,200 pages, 120 pages a day. That speaks a lot. I would say if I were to give this a score on Goodreads right now, I'm probably going to give it a 4.5 out of 5. I think that while I appreciate that King touched the book up, updated some of the timeline, I think that maybe there's still a lot of exposition that could have been trimmed, and it could have made it a tighter, more cohesive narrative. But it doesn't hurt it that it's there. And if you like reading King's character work, there's a billion characters in here for you to attach yourself to and study. Whew, that was a lot. This is a long video. Thanks for sticking through it. If you haven't read it, go read it. I'm looking out for the CBS show this fall or this winter, and we'll probably talk about it when it comes on. So thank you for being here, as always. Thank you for liking and commenting and subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is déclassé. It is an adjective meaning of a fallen social position or inferior status. Jean thought her imitation designer bag looked exactly like the real thing, but the other girls in her exclusive private school quickly ridiculed Jean and her bag for being déclassé. Déclassé, D-E-C-L-A-S-S-E.